Hey guys, my name is Nabiri and it's time for another kicking of the week, and today I want to share with you a technique that you can use to make better punches. So this technique that I want to show you today is just really great. You can use it on any type of punch, whether you're making it from a 9-9, if you're making it from serum, even with finished punches, you can just apply this technique to just play around with it and see if you can get a new punch out of your old punch. Basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to cut up a punch to just reorganize it a little bit, give it a different tone, and just make sure that it punches in the right way. So for today we're going to be using a 9-9 to create our punch. I just feel lots of guys still want to make a fresh kick from a 9-9, and I respect that, although I like to use serum for myself. For our 9-9 we're going to be using EKS9, and as you can hear it's just a basic kick drum coming out of here. Now let's just put this in the mixer. And over here, I'm just going to briefly talk you through the EQ and distortion process. But after that, we're really going to dive deep into this technique that I want to show you to create a better punch. And of course, leave a comment down below. Let me know you were here. And of course, if anything was unclear, I'll do my best to answer your questions. But without further ado, let's start creating this punch. So the reason that I just want to briefly talk you through this EQ and distortion process is because it's just a playful thing. Just be wild with distortion, don't hold yourself back, and just see if you can get a nice sound out of here. So we're starting off with this first EQ, and this is just a general peak to create some resonance with some distortion. So from our basic 9-9 kick, we're using this aggressive distortion to just create that first distorted kick sound. As you can see, I'm really throwing this open all the way, throwing the hard clip open all the way to just make it crunchy as fuck. And it's just old school and a basic distorted 9-9. Now we're taking our next EQ, and what we're basically just doing is we're boosting, seeing how it sounds, and then just maybe making some dips to just shape our sound a little bit more. So if we only take our boost for now, put a distortion after it, I'll talk about that later. But just to show you what this really does, is you have this boost, then we're gonna add a dip, and that's somehow creating some room for our punch. So we're just playing around with boosts and dips. Just keep doing that until you have something that you like. Then I added another one, and then it created this sound. So we're really just focusing only on the punch. With all these peaks and dips, just try to focus on your punch only, because you're never really gonna get a full hardstyle kick out of one layer. So just focus on your punch. Now for that second distortion, I'm still being really aggressive. I'm just playing around with the mix, opening it up a little bit more, and just opening up the hard clip all the way, adding some soft clip, and just playing around with the tone. And the tone is just nice to play around with, and it can really change the sound of your entire punch. So if we, for example, put this to 40, it's just gonna sound a lot different. And with 10, for example. So I kept this at 13.7, but just play around with that tone to just see if it shapes your sound a little bit differently. And then we have this EQ, and this EQ is just a basic peak and a dip again. And what I did is I automated this little peak over here. So the peak that we're having is just slowly moving down. Something like this can just really help creating a little bit more movement, and since punches and kick drums are just downward moving pitch envelopes, you can make a downward moving bell to just emphasize that a little bit more. So I just did it to just make some more movement for our punch. So after that, I'm adding a new distortion, and this distortion is just as aggressive as the other ones. I'm trying to be adding as much distortion as I can, opening up the soft clip all the way. The hard clip is quite loud as well, but we're turning down the mix, and with that mix you can introduce your distortion in there a little bit. So just play around with your mix and see if you can just blend in some distortion without distorting it all the way. If you just open every distortion to 100%, it's just gonna destroy your kick, but you wanna add extreme distortion, but maybe turn down the mix a little bit. Now after that, we just do some extra EQing, just to shape our sound a little bit more, adding our final distortion, and with just some extra balancing EQ, we finish this little layer. Now this is where the fun part comes in, and I'll show you an example afterwards. So I'm trying to explain this, but later on we're just gonna take this layer and we're gonna do the same thing all over again so that you really hear what I'm doing. So the technique that I want to show you is just basically rearranging your punch. We're gonna cut it up and just play around with it to just create a different type of punch and make it a lot better. Now, one thing you really need to know is that you need to put your waveform on stretch. Now, if you put it to stretch, it's gonna add a little bit of time. I just personally really like to take that away, and after this you can play around with the pitch, for example, without having your waveform stretch, and that's just great. That way you can really just play around without really screwing up your punch too much. Now we had a nice transient, and this transient sounded okay. It sounded like this. But I just felt it needed to be a little bit higher. And with this stretch turned on, we can just play around with our pitch. And I just pitched it up a little bit, so we're creating a higher punch or a higher transient for this punch. So we're just taking the different parts from the punch to just create a different sound. Now I cut the punch up in 3 pieces. I just feel that 3 pieces works the best. It's just a nice transient, your main body for your punch, and just the part that's gonna transition into your tail. I feel that works. You can do 4 as well, but just play around a little bit with it. Now for the second part, I just played around a little bit with it. And I just stretched it a little bit, and I just added some pogo. And it doesn't really change the sound that much, but it changed the whole feeling of the punch. Right now we have a nice transient and a nice main body for our punch. And if we would try to take that away without screwing everything up, this is already sounding a little bit different. And of course with the stretch it's just gonna sound different as well. But just playing around with the little stretch and a little bit of pitching or pogoing, it's just gonna create a different sound for your punch. And for the final one, what I basically did was pitching it down so that it has a little bit of a lower feeling, added some resonance in the mixer and some distortion as well. But with this pitching, you can really just shape your punch in such a different way. If we take a listen to the punch right now, as I edited it, it sounds like this. And it's nice punchy, nice low ending of this punch. I personally really like it. And if we just take away that pitching, it's just gonna sound so much different. So it's just, in my opinion, a lot worse than without adding these little bits and pieces. Now, after you're done playing around with your cuts, you can just still add a club kick to this because it doesn't really have that much low end, or at least it doesn't really have a clear low end anymore. So just add a club kick beneath there, make sure that it's in phase, and yeah, you'll have a fuller punch. So now we're done with all the talking. Let me just show you how I rearrange my punches with this technique. Now this is the export from that 909 punch that we had. And of course we're just gonna only take our punch. And over here we're just gonna take our cutting tool and we're just gonna cut up some bits and pieces. And I personally really don't think too much about it. Of course, I have in my mind that I have the transient, the body of the punch, and the ending. That's all. Just cut somewhere where you like to cut. And after cutting up your punch, I like to make all the layers unique and put them in a mixer channel like this. So each different bit has its own mixer channel. This way you can also emphasize your transient a little bit more by putting it louder. Now we're gonna start with the transient and we're just gonna do something else than the previous one. And let's just first start by putting this to stretch. Now you'll see the little time, take that away. Yeah, let's just play around a little bit with this. And I feel like I just want to try pitching it down a little bit, see how that sounds. So this is alright, and we're not really going to get too much out of this transient just because it's not really a big sound. Now I like to just play around a little bit with the body. And we'll just see what happens. Just play around a little bit with the pitch, maybe some stretching and maybe some pogoing. for now, I feel this is alright. Maybe we want to play around with it some more when we add our final part over here, just because your punch needs to glue together, of course. And what you saw me doing is just raising our transient, just because it's such a small sound, you didn't really hear it pop out, and of course we really need that for our punch. Now I like to put the final part on transient with bleeding, so that you can just cut it shorter if you feel like you need it, and right now it's just too crunchy at the end, so we're just gonna cut it a little bit shorter. I feel this already sounds so different from the previous punch that I created. Just taking this final bit and putting it higher can just change the shape of your punch. So just play around with this. Like over here, we're having this low and deep punch. And with this ending over here that we pitch it higher, it just sounds so different. So just play around with this and just see if you can get something that you like. Now, rearranging your bits and pieces like this can really just help changing your sound. And what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna dive into the mixer, and we're just gonna put some EQs and maybe some distortion somewhere. Maybe our transient could use just a little bit of an EQ. To just make it a little bit more tonal. And let's just see how our body snippet just sounds after that EQ boost in our transient, because it all needs to work together. They're quite in the same range, so I feel they still just work together. So that's just important. And now let's just maybe add some EQ and some distortion on this final part. And by just playing around with these EQs and some distortion at that final layer, you can just shape your punch a little bit. What we're gonna do right now is we're just gonna route this to a bus. And in this bus, we're just gonna EQ this as a whole, give it some distortion to just pull it together, and yeah, hopefully finalize this punch. Now, and of course, when you feel like you finish your punch, you can just still play around with these layers a little bit. And I just want to do that to see if I can maybe rearrange some things that they sound a little bit better, but I feel we're already on the right track. Now, the real big catch with this is just playing around with the transitions of these little parts. I feel the transient is 9 out of 10 times just working for me personally, but after that you just need to make sure that our transient goes to that body part and then goes to the end of your punch properly. So you might find yourself just playing around with this just for like half an hour, playing around until you finally get the right spot. And after you find that right spot, you can just export it and start using it for your kick. For today, this is our end result, and it's just a nice punch that sounds so different from our first punch when it came from that 909. Now, I hope you liked this video and you learned something from this, and hopefully I'll see you back soon again. Cheers!